It was unprecedented. Britain's Prime Minister and the Attorney General both intervening to thwart a criminal investigation. But then different rules apply to Saudi Arabia. It's been said the Royal House of Saud appears to be above the law, British law. And now British justice is being questioned around the world, and the questions won't go away. Its location has meant every travail over 20 years has been portrayed as a nightmare. But this time the Serious Fraud Office is in real trouble, and its director is taking it on the chin.
Who made the decision to drop the investigation into BAE and the Saudis?
I did.
You did on your own?
I made it, yes, I made it with my colleagues on the team. We discussed the case with care. We discussed it with the Attorney General and the Solicitor General, but in the end I made the decision. But
you discussed it with the Attorney General, so there was pressure from the Attorney General. He told you what he wanted you to do?
No, he didn't. I said I discussed it with him.
But many view this as spin. They see the rule of law overturned by politicians for BAE and the Saudis.
A number of people had said to me that it'll never come to court. There was a lot of pressure on the SFO and on the government to cancel the investigation. So I can't say I was surprised, but with the amount of time and the effect it had on my life, I wasn't too happy about it.
Well, it really isn't the allegations against BAE, it's the Serious Fraud Office's response to it. The British had their big chance with this case. It was under investigation, it was widely discussed, and when it got uncomfortable, it appears, to the rest of the world, they closed it.
The Attorney General and the Prime Minister both stated publicly national security had been at stake.
Continuation of the investigation would cause serious damage to UK-Saudi security, intelligence and diplomatic cooperation.
In terms of the broader Middle East, in terms of helping in respect of Israel-Palestine, and that strategic interest comes first.
Robert Wardell's serious fraud investigators had just made a major breakthrough. They got access to some Saudi royals' Swiss bank accounts. Yet he agreed with the government it all should be brought to a halt.
To continue the investigation was going to cause damage. It was going to cause serious harm with our relations with Saudi Arabia. And that harm would be reflected in a lack of cooperation, so I was told, that would seriously damage national security and international security.
They'd withdraw intelligence cooperation?
It is in those sort of areas, certainly.
But who was saying that? They hadn't threatened that, had they?
Well, the information I had came from a number of sources. When one is conducting a criminal investigation or prosecution, you must take into account the public interest before deciding whether to go on. This is perfectly normal.
But the intelligence services in the UK never had any intelligence that the Saudis were going to withdraw cooperation. Others are very sceptical about this. Why would the Saudis withdraw cooperation?
I spoke on 3 occasions with our ambassador. He's the man in the country, he's the man who knows what is going on. What the effect of the lack of cooperation or a withdrawal of cooperation would actually have been, well, we then need to rely on the intelligence and security services.
But on your terms, you gave in to blackmail by the Saudis then?
I don't think so. I made a decision whether to continue an investigation, balancing the public interests, and I decided quite firmly, and I think quite rightly, that the investigation had to stop.
Isn't that blackmail?
I don't think that, well, that's the word you've chosen to use.
Mrs. Thatcher wearing an ankle-length dress, long sleeves and a light veil in deference to Arab traditions.
Almost as soon as Margaret Thatcher agreed to sell arms and fighter planes to the Saudis 22 years ago, the corruption allegations emerged. Competitors suspected Britain secured the deal by illicitly greasing the wheels. And today, in America, a key Saudi ally, they're sceptical of British claims the fraud investigation had to be dropped because of Saudi threats to intelligence.
Those kinds of threats need to be evaluated very carefully if indeed they take place. And I think it would be at least a partially empty threat, particularly since they've been under pretty incessant attack not only against foreigners in Saudi Arabia, but attacks against Saudi Arabians, and very importantly recently attacks against strategic Saudi Arabian oil facilities that have a great deal of common interest, but also a great deal of interest for the long-term economic health and prosperity of the Saudi kingdom.
So it could have been a bluff by the Saudis and Britain's fallen for it.
First, I don't know that it occurred. Secondly, I don't want to characterize it. If I were you, I would go and talk to the Saudis about it.
So we went to the Saudis, to Prince Turki Al-Faisal.
Wherever I go, I'm encouraged by the interest taken in Saudi Arabia.
He'd run Saudi intelligence for 24 years before becoming ambassador to London and then Washington, which is where we caught up with him, making a speech on Saudi-Western relations.
Ambassador, could you spare 1 moment for the BBC for Newsnet? What do you think about the fact that Britain has stopped investigations into alleged corruption with Saudi Arabia?
I'm not seeing press now.
Really? But I mean, it's a serious issue.
Well, you'll have to ask our ambassador in London on that.
So we asked at the London Embassy, only to be referred to a letter the ambassador had written to a newspaper, suggesting any wrongdoing happened so long ago we cannot rewrite the past. We were then rebuffed by this email.
Dear Mr. Marshall, the ambassador has spoken out. It is all clear in his letter to the Telegraph, which I have emailed to you. I would like to leave it there. Thank you. Hazza al-Hasha.
I had spent some 3 years of my life being interviewed by the Serious Fraud Office and the Ministry of Defence Police.
Peter Gardner blew the whistle on the slush fund BAE set up for the Saudis. He'd been involved dispersing it, spending millions on largesse for the Saudi royals.
I think the highest month was about 1.5 million a month. And pounds, yes. I mean, these ones here, there's 995,000 there, 959,000 there, 380,000 here. That was a small month, 170,000, 620,000. There was property, there was medical bills, there was boats, there was purchase items for cars.
The BBC's Money programme and the Guardian newspaper both carried his story, which added to pressure for the Serious Fraud Office to investigate the investigation, which has now been stopped.
What was the reaction of those in the Serious Fraud Office to the dropping of the inquiry?
Well, I think the actual words said to me were they were gutted.
You were told this by an SFO official?
Yes, one of the key people had told me that they were gutted.
I went to see them the night that we made the decision. I'd obviously discussed it with them. They understood why it had been made, and I think they accepted that. Of course they're disappointed. Of course you can't work on something for a year and then find that it's having to be stopped for those reasons. But there are other cases that they've been pursuing and are pursuing, and I thought they reacted in a very professional way.
I'm told they were gutted.
Well, they may have been gutted. I don't think they were. They didn't give me that impression.
See, we've got government ministers here now saying there was never any evidence. Baroness Simon last month said there was no evidence in the BAE Saudi case. Well, that's not true, is it? There was evidence.
Of course there was evidence.
Investment fund managers have warned Britain's compromised its integrity as a financial centre.
The dropping of the investigation sent a very alarming signal in the marketplace. Paying a bribe may be in the near-term self-interest of an individual company that won a piece of business, and as their shareholder we may be inclined to see that favorably, but in actual fact we don't, because we're invested in thousands of companies, and the mere presence of corruption in a market destabilizes that market.
At the OECD in Paris this week, they're expected to condemn Britain for undermining the Anti-Bribery Convention.
We're fearing is that immunity is given to those bribing, to put it very bluntly. And that would mean that competitors would probably seek likewise, and that would be the end of this convention.
It hasn't helped, I've got to accept that, but I don't think it has undermined it, because we are doing quite a lot. At the SFO, for example, we've taken on the lead responsibility for investigating corruption overseas in this country.
How many prosecutions
We maintain the register. No prosecutions have been brought so far, but
Not
we
one.
are... Well, one was brought.
You've brought one prosecution in 100 years over overseas corruption.
As far as I'm aware, that's right. There may be others, I don't know.
Did you get a conviction?
No, we didn't in that case. There was an acquittal by the jury.
It's a pretty awful record, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think, as I say, that to be fair, the SFO's only been here for 20 of those 100 years.
Well, still, I mean, it's supposed to be...
No, I appreciate that, but look, the law was changed in 2002.
But no prosecutions at all?
There's no prosecutions, but don't forget, the law isn't retrospective. One's looking at what happened after then. One has then to discover it and see whether you can investigate and obtain.
Where's the deterrent, though? Without any prosecutions, there's no deterrent, is there? And everybody says there has to be a deterrent.
I entirely agree, and that is why we are putting a good deal of our resources into looking at these cases and investigating them.
Well, there's massive documents in the United States: $93,000, $82,000, $306,000, $55,000, another $55,000, $257,000. This is just a small part, just over a short period of time.
Large parts of BAE largesse for the Saudis went through the United States. This could be their Achilles heel.
Well, quite substantial amounts, particularly during the key summer months, because the Saudis particularly like visiting the United States: New York, Chicago, California, Hawaii, and they will bring their children, their families out there and spend quite some considerable time there. So it's very expensive.
Much of the expense went through the man running the Saudi end of the BAE arms deal, Prince Turki bin Nasser. He loved the US, he'd enjoyed an honor guard at the Pentagon and a 7-acre mansion in Beverly Hills. But meanwhile, the Americans were determined to get assurances about how BAE conducted its business.
It is my understanding that when BAE wished to engage in defense business in the United States, the Secretary of Defense, who was then William Cohen, said that they wanted to assure that BAE, in all of its ramifications all around the world, all its subsidiaries, would in effect comply just as every other American firm was expected to comply with the American Foreign Corrupt Practices Act legislation. That is, that they would engage in the American defense business freely and openly, but on a level playing field.
Which suggests there was some concern about BAE at the time.
Which suggests there was some concern, or a basis for some concern, yes.
In 2002, Sir Kevin Tebbit, Britain's senior defence official, was upbraided by the US Assistant Secretary of State E. Anthony Wayne about persistent allegations that BAE pays bribes to foreign public officials. The continuing absence of any investigation by the British government of allegations of BAE bribery would be difficult for us to understand. The investigation having started and then been aborted, it's believed the Americans have now finally lost patience.
It's my understanding that the DOJ, the Department of Justice, is pursuing this very aggressively because the OECD Convention only has teeth if all of its member countries are prosecuting anti-bribery within their borders. Separately, the DOJ could prosecute this matter within the United States, and again, it's my understanding that they have a great interest in that.
Obviously, when one is conducting an investigation, it's necessary to look to obtain evidence throughout the world, very often in a case like this. We have had contact with the American Department of Justice, certainly, but I haven't discussed it with them.
It'll be embarrassing if they, as many think seems likely now, take up the case, won't it, after we've dropped it?
If they want to take the case up as to offences that may have been committed in their jurisdiction, that's a matter for them. The issues may be different.
But the Saudis won't threaten them, will they?
I've no idea what the Saudis will say to the Americans. It may not be an issue as far as they're concerned.
This doesn't seem to speak too well of the independence of the Serious Fraud Office, of your independence, does it, from government?
I don't agree. I made the decision. I made it independently. I made it on the basis of the information I had.
You made it after speaking to the Ambassador to Saudi and the Attorney General.
And
the Attorney General sits in the Cabinet, who in turn was spoken to by the Prime Minister.
Well, absolutely right. And that's the proper way of doing it.
But isn't that political pressure?
No. Why is that political? I wouldn't call it.
Because the Prime Minister's...
I'm calling it a balancing act. I'm calling it a balancing act in the public interest, deciding what the harm would be in continuing an investigation. That was my decision. I made it. And I made it independently.
This is a desperately sad situation that we're stymied by the Saudis.
Well,
justice is stymied.
I'm not pretending it is a comfortable situation, but we are where we are. And we are carrying on such investigations as we can.
Indeed, the Serious Fraud Office is continuing investigations into BAE's arms sales to Tanzania, the Czech Republic, Romania, Chile and South Africa. But Saudi Arabia is off the hook.